and 2 brothers. Tragically, Derek's own daughter passed away in 2003 when she was only 4 years old. Derek is buried next to his beloved daughter.
Derek was a kind, generous, big-hearted man, and he gave to this community. He was a positive asset to this community.
62-year-old Neva Jane Rogers was born on December 19, 1942 in Pillager, Minnesota. Neva was the only non-Native American that was killed on that terrible day. Teaching was her passion, and she loved her students and their rich and vibrant culture. She took the time to get to know them as individuals and wished them nothing but the best. It was reported that Neva would frequently bring winter mittens, hats, gloves, and scarves to hand out to them on an as-needed basis. Her memorial stone reads, quote, "Sing, dance, laugh, love." Alicia Alberta White was born on May 26, 1990, in Bemidji, Minnesota. She was only 14 years old when she was brutally taken from the world. She lived with her grandmother, whom she helped to raise her other siblings. Alicia's best friend said she was so much fun to be around, and that was affirmed by the descriptions of her bright personality, which lit up every room she entered. She is buried at the Fox Point Cemetery. 15-year-old Thurleen Stillday was born and raised in Ponema, which is possibly the most traditional community of the nation of Red Lake. Thurleen loved storytelling. She was a novice snowmobiler but loved showing off her skills nonetheless. Thurleen was buried on her family's burial ground on the Red Lake Reservation. Chanel Rose Bear was only 15 years old on that fateful day she lost her life. Chanel was from Ponema and was always said to be wearing a smile. She loved the traditional Ojibwe language, and being very tall, she had a promising future as a basketball player. Chase Lucier was also only 15 years old when he was killed. Despite his young age, Chase had become a first-time dad only a month before he was murdered. This young man managed to balance the care of a new baby with being a full-time teenage student. His final moments in this world were spent trying to help push students to safety before he was shot himself. 15-year-old Dwayne Lewis was the kid with the basketball. He loved the sport so much that he played anywhere he could dribble the ball, including the community gym, school, various neighborhood courts near the reservation. Dwayne's best friend was Jeff May, the young man that selflessly tried to prevent Lee from his murder spree. Jeff May is a survivor of this brutal attack. As he tried to stab Lee with a pencil and wrestle him to the ground, he was shot. The bullet entered through his jaw, stopping near vertebrae in his neck. He suffered a stroke, becoming paralyzed on his left side. Jeff was airlifted to a larger hospital called Merit Care, located in Fargo, North Dakota, which is approximately 100 miles from Red Lake. Emergency surgery was performed, and the bullet was removed successfully. However, Jeff then endured occupational, speech, and physical therapy for at least 2 long months after the shooting. His recovery was coming along, and most importantly, he survived. Jeff was later recognized by Reader's Digest for the heroism he displayed in the face of such evil.
We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse. We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
The Red Lake Indian Reservation has an Ojibwe permit, which permits only tribal members to live on the reservation. Furthermore, they have a say in who is allowed on reservation land. Media requests were denied outright immediately following the shooting. The families living on the reservation probably needed their private time to honor their loved ones according to their traditions, without the prying eyes of the media that, given a chance, would likely saturate the evening news with the haunting images of the traumatized teenagers. The reservation is located about 250 miles north of Minneapolis and covers well over 1,000 square miles and reaches 9 different counties. As of 2011, Ojibwe was the official language of the Red Lake Reservation. Red Lake is considered one of the most popular reservations within the state's borders, boasting a population of 5,162 residents. The reservation land is occupied and owned entirely by tribal members of the Red Lake Band. Due to the size and location of the reservation, it is considered one of the most isolated in the entire United States. The Red Lake Senior High School is a state-funded public school. Over 300 students attended the school each year, and the school has been open since 1936. Ground broke for the building of the school in 1935. The school mascot is the Warriors. The school now offers online forms for anonymous reporting of bullying or other concerning behaviors that need to be looked into. The elementary, middle, and high schools all teach the Ojibwe language as part of their curriculum. Lee was born on August 8, 1988, and lived through challenging times at a young age. His mom was only 17 when Lee was born, and his dad was 21. Lee's mom was living in Minneapolis, and his dad's family was in the Red Lake area. His parents were never married, and when Lee was only 3 months old, his mom gave him to his father to raise him. Lee lived with his dad and paternal grandparents for the first 3 years of his life, until his mother returned to claim her child and bring him back to live with her in the Twin Cities. She ended up being arrested in June of 1993 for an OWI, or operating a motor vehicle while intoxicated. In the fall of 1996, Lee moved with his mom to Shakopee, Minnesota, where he attended the 3rd grade at Pearson Elementary School. Not long after he started 4th grade, however, they moved to Chaska, Minnesota. They didn't stay there long either before packing up and relocating to the Red Lake Reservation. This time, Lee attended the 5th grade at Bluff Creek Elementary School. Lee's dad committed suicide in July of 1997, when Lee was barely even 10 years old. Making the situation worse, the suicide was after a days-long standoff between Lee's dad and the police. Dash, Lee's grandfather, was on the police force at the time and rushed to his son's home trying to persuade his son to surrender. Sadly, it didn't work, and the standoff culminated in the eventual suicide.
It was really hard for him. He was close with his father.
Research into this case didn't immediately reveal the reason for the standoff. Not even 2 years later, on March 5, 1999, research into this case didn't immediately reveal the reason the standoff began. Not even 2 years later, on March 5, 1999, Lee's mother was in a car accident and suffered severe injuries, including brain damage. She was placed into a skilled nursing home where she could receive 24-hour care. The car that she was riding in was driven by her cousin, who was also killed in the crash. Both were drinking, and it was determined that alcohol had played a factor. Despite the odds against it, she recovered, albeit slowly. In 2003, she recovered enough to obtain a part-time job. Still, Lee was sent to live with his father's family on the Red Lake Reservation. He was placed with his grandmother initially. She passed away in 2003, so Lee was sent to live with various aunts. In 2002, Lee failed the 8th grade because of truancy, or missing classes and failing grades. The school allowed him to retake his courses, and he ultimately passed. He started 9th grade in 2003, but then Lee was hospitalized at Thief River Falls in June of 2004. He was having suicidal thoughts and was admitted for a 72-hour psychiatric hold. The hospital prescribed Prozac, and he was released. At the time he committed the shooting, Lee wasn't attending school. Some neighbors reported that Lee was ordered to complete his schoolwork at home because of his disciplinary records. Other reports indicated that he was expelled for violating the school's rules, and some teachers even recommended that Lee was a good candidate for homeschooling. On March 6, 2005, barely more than 2 weeks pre-shooting, Lee watched a movie called Elephant. The film is about a school shooting. Lee watched the movie with several friends, although it was not reported whether he began discussing his plans with his friends or whether watching the movie prompted him to create a plan right then and right there. Lee bounced around between his paternal grandmother Shelda and grandfather Dash's homes. Therefore, it is not completely clear precisely who Lee was living with at the time of the shooting, but he was obviously welcome to stay with either of them whenever he wanted. Lee often complained that his mother was abusive and an alcoholic, claiming she hit him with different objects, let her various boyfriends hit him, and she even locked him out of the house sometimes. He further alleged that she made him kneel in the corner of the house and locked him inside a closet. What is clear is that Lee discussed his plans with his cousin, who also happened to be his best friend. In fact, the two even exchanged some emails about the planned mass murder. Because of his knowledge of the crime and failing to notify anyone or intervene in any way, Lee's cousin was charged for his involvement, specifically conspiracy to commit murder. Even though he wasn't the triggerman, we will still not be naming Lee's cousin in honor of our no notoriety pledge. The cousin pleaded guilty to using the internet to transmit threatening messages. Because of his juvenile status at the time of the crime, little else is known about the cousin or the extent of his involvement otherwise. Lee made 2 suicide attempts in May and June of 2004. One time, he tried to slit his wrists with a box cutter, and the second time, he removed the eraser from a pencil, taking the metal part off to create a sort of razor blade, and once again, tried to slit his wrist.
I had taught him 2 years before, and I remember just kind of walking around helping groups, and he just stopped me, and he was like, "Hey, Dodds, did you know Hitler liked math?" So I sat down beside him, and he pulled his sleeves up and showed me where he had been cutting on himself. And so I said, "Well, I'm going to have to report this." And he said, "Yes." At that time, what you would do is write up probably like a concern report. I can't point a finger at a certain person or a certain point that he slipped through the cracks, but he definitely did.
Lee claimed that he wasn't really trying to hurt himself. He was only trying to release his inner pain. This is commonly referred to as cutting. Therefore, Lee was prescribed a daily dose of 40 milligrams of Prozac. The hospital mental health workers claimed that Lee was definitely not suicidal, but rather that he was cutting himself, a new, quote, fad.
Once they caught him cutting himself.
And we went to the emergency room with all the right people to try to get him some help. And the doctor there told us that that was a fad. He's seeing a lot of that. And sent him home.
The idea of a person cutting themselves in an effort to release their internal pain is some passing trend is incredibly dangerous thinking. Family members later reported that Lee was acting a little off, strange if you will, just before the shooting. He seemed restless and agitated and couldn't sit still. Lee claimed to family, at least, that he was bullied, and that is why he quit attending school for nearly 5 weeks leading up to that day. He alleged that he was teased because of his size. Lee was tall at well over 6 feet and 250 pounds. His teachers reported that Lee was a bright kid, but simply didn't want to put the effort in to complete the work. There was a journal of sorts, really just a notebook, but within it was Lee's dark thoughts and stories, a place where he detailed his worst ideas and plans, including talking about drinking until he passed out, and odd feelings which woke him up at night. The emotions were described as tingly, and he noticed that he witnessed small creatures sitting by his bed at night. Lee was heavily involved with online message boards, writing about his hatred of living in Red Lake. Lee was a regular poster in various groups, referring to Nazi Germany and his admiration of Hitler. His group of friends was small in numbers, but the couple kids he regularly hung around with stayed at each other's houses all the time, talking and watching TV. He wasn't always dark and gloomy, though. Lee enjoyed listening to music like Johnny Cash and John Lennon and did thoughtful things like leaving sticky notes on the TV to inform the family of his whereabouts.
A lot of his feelings came out in his writing and on his drawings. He was a very good artist.
He dreamt of producing movies and traveling, especially overseas. However, his behavior started becoming darker as he claimed of being teased about his parents. He was skipping school and starting to wear his hair in a manner that looked like spiked horns. He did this because other kids would punch and hit him, pulling out chunks of his hair.
I mean, this is all in hindsight, but I wish I knew what he was going through now, that he was a loner and stuff like that. And, I wish I knew about that. I wish I could have talked to him more positive.
The day after the shooting, people from the community gathered in circles at the school gym. Drummers formed a